Welcome everyone to Keep It Classy Tech. In this video I'm going to be comparing the 77-inch LG G1 to the 77-inch Sony A80J. So the way I'm going to do this is just start off with the scorecards and then move into brightness, a couple of still images, and then have a 2x2 grid pattern of content showing each TV both in their factory white point settings as well as after a 2-point adjustment in the service menu to the same white point for both. So starting with the scorecards. As far as accuracy goes, that's going to go to the Sony for out of the box because of the LG mostly having slightly higher color errors as well as that near black shadow detail that's too dark. However, the LG gives you more control over calibration and is more entwined with Kalman, so it's easier to get a better result in the end with it. However, the Sony kind of simplifies the process, making where you really only have to run a calibration for SDR and then it will do its own thing based off of that for HDR. You also can't do 3D LUTs on the Sony, whereas you can on the LG. So it's a long way of just saying that the LG after calibration can be a little bit better, but there's more work that goes into it. As far as clarity, sharpness, detail, that's where Sony has the advantage, especially in lower quality content or lower resolution content because of the XR processor. However, pretty much everything else as far as like gaming, connectivity, SDR brightness, HDR brightness is about the same for both, but pretty much everything else the LG has advantages in, again mostly with gaming. And that's not just because it has a Dolby Vision game mode at 120 Hz and not because it has VRR, FreeSync, G-Sync and all of that, or the extra ports, but you can also disable the dimming, and some people are going to say that they don't see their Sony's dimming, and that's fine if they don't see it, but the fact is that it is. If you're someone who is gaming enough that you're gonna want or notice a difference with VRR, then you're the kind of gamer who is going to notice that the Sony dims when gaming both in SDR and HDR games. And there's also image retention left when gaming on the Sony, so like in Destiny 2, if I open my character to change some gear around, those little icons on the screen that are bright, when I unpause to go back into the actual game from my character menu, you'll see those little squares leaving these little bright gray areas in the game for about 10-15 seconds, whereas you don't have any of that image retention on the G1. And so on the LG you can disable the logo dimming feature, which will detect static elements and then start to dim the screen, and it's a very slow process. So the way it works is on LG, if it's off, it doesn't dim. That's it, period. If it's on low, it will take about a minute of having the same element detected on screen before it starts to dim, and it's very slow, and it will dim the screen by 15% on low. On high, it will dim up to 30%, but on Sony, you cannot disable it, and depending on what your peak luminance setting is set to, it can dim as high as 50%. So it is quite noticeable if you have your peak luminance on high. If you put it on medium, that's where most people probably won't notice it too much, and if you put it at low, then you pretty much won't have any dimming because you're already not bright enough for it to go past the point that it needs to dim in the first place. The problem with that is that's only for SDR. In HDR, you need your peak luminance at high, and so it will dim in HDR as well, which I noticed in Destiny 2. And the way you can check is if you switch input and switch back and all of a sudden it's brighter, that means that it had been dimming and you probably just didn't notice it until it was enough that you were like, hey, this looks dim now. The other issue is there is color banding or posterization at 4K 120 Hz HDR on both displays. However, the Sony does look a bit worse. It does give you the smooth gradation option, which helps. But if you set it to high, you're going to lose some fine detail. If you set it to low or medium, you probably won't notice any detail being taken away, so I would try those settings. However, there are just some areas where it does look really bad, and on the LG you can put it into PC mode, which helps that out. Alright, so that's enough for gaming for now. So movies, TV. If you are someone who has a large collection of standard Blu-rays that are 1080p SDR, or you do a lot of streaming content that's not, new 4K HDR Dolby Vision type content, or you watch stuff with a lot of film grain and you're not a fan of film grain, this is where the Sony's advantage comes in. All that kind of stuff is going to look better on the Sony. It's going to be sharper, more clear. The Sony has a way of removing some of the film grain without removing all of it. And, as far as creator's intent and all that goes, if you were to watch that stuff on an older display that's not just a pure sheen of glass like these panels are, then that grain is going to be somewhat covered up in the first place. So the Sony is just able to kind of replicate that look. So that might be a little more jarring on the LG just to have all the grain full force through that pure clean glass panel. And while there is noise reduction settings, I never noticed them do anything on the LG, while it's pretty obvious what they do on the Sony. So now going into motion, they're both very good for motion. However, I personally prefer the Sony because I can actually use smoothness at 1 and not see soap opera effect, or at least most of the time not see soap opera effect, whereas the LG gives you a higher degree of control going from 0 to 10. But even at 1 or with the cinematic movement setting, I would always see soap opera effect on the LG. So I know that is completely personal preference and goes back and forth depending on who you ask. However, I personally gave the Sony an excellent for motion because it's the first TV I've ever seen where I can actually turn a setting on and not be bothered by soap opera effect. So that's a win in my book. Alright, so now I'm going to move into brightness measurements, both before changing the white point and after, as well as SDR after changing the white point, and they're pretty close on both of them. The LG is much warmer out of the box, so it gained brightness just by changing the white point, whether it was in the service menu or not. The Sony, however, you have to change the white point in the service menu in order to gain any boost to the brightness. So overall, they're pretty much the same in brightness, just down to panel variance with one exception, and that is after calibration, the Sony has a bit higher full field or 100% measurement, which means it has a little bit more relaxed ABL. So now I just want to take a look at this image. I'm going to zoom in on both. And the reality creation with the Sony is on the left and the LG is on the right. And if you look really close at the license plate, you can see that it says Feb for February on the Sony. And you can also make out the numbers for the tire width on the Sony with the reality creation more clearly than you can on the LG. And also underneath the car, you can see more shadow detail. So now in this image, pretty much the same thing. If you look at really fine detail like the stitched leather on the steering wheel or some of the numbers in the dash, they're just more legible and more clear on the Sony. Reality creation was set to manual 20, which was its default, and this was a 1080p YouTube video in SDR. Alright, so now we are going to move into the meat of the video. We're going to have the A80J on the left, the G1 on the right, out of the box white point up top, and the 2-point service menu adjusted for both white point on the bottom. And that white point used is D-Nice's white point that he came up with for the Evo panel, which both of these TVs have. So the images say pre-cal and cal, they're not fully calibrated, it's just the white point was adjusted using 2-point controls in the service menu, and that's it. So with that out of the way, if you do like this video and you've liked it so far, and you would like other people to be able to find this video, please just a reminder to press the like button, and that covers that. So what are we seeing here? Well, you can kind of see that the calibrated A80J is brighter than the other images, especially like here with that white in the background. It really stands out. And also because my camera is not capable of capturing this entire HDR range, dark areas are a little bit more crushed than they actually are in person, and really bright areas are not as bloomy or blown out as the camera is showing. However, the way this was done is each was shot one at a time with the same camera settings, all in manual. So manual ISO, aperture, white balance, everything on the camera was manual. So nothing would change, and it was the same on all 4 situations here. So if we look at the G1 pre-cal on the top right, that's going to be the warmest color temperature here because that was even warmer than D65 out of the box. After calibration, it ended up a little bit cooler than D65. Well, the look of it would be D65, but measurably it's cooler because it was a perceptual match. So then if we look at the A80J pre-cal, that is much cooler than D65 out of the box. That's Sony's white point or the Judd offset. Whereas again, both of the ones on the bottom, like whenever you see whites and grays and stuff, they're going to look pretty much the same because they're both to the same white point. So the main differences you're going to see after the adjustment between the A80J and the G1 is in oranges and yellows, the LG has higher airs. So orange and yellow, anything to do with those colors, are going to look oversaturated on the LG. And then also shadow detail on the Sony is going to be more visible, especially with after the calibration because it did gain brightness. So pretty much across the board, it's brighter, from dark to bright. And that's in comparison to before its calibration, not necessarily to the G1 because they both are very, very similar in brightness. There are some scenes where the Sony really pushes its brightness and it's very noticeable. And then there's some scenes where the G1 just has the same oomph and then there is no real brightness advantage one way or the other. So if you do see a brightness increase on the Sony, it's most likely to do with its processor, not because the TV is actually capable of more brightness. It just knows how to send energy to bright areas more so than the LG. And again, if anything looks blown out, washed out, whatever, that's 99.9% of the time because of the camera and wasn't in person. I will be getting a new camera here pretty soon. I wish I could have had it for this video, but I had to make do with the Panasonic G85 that I have, and oh well. What else? So when it comes to the reality creation and creator's intent argument, some people say that if you use reality creation with the XR processor and it's making fine detail stand out more, that it doesn't match the creator's intent, and I disagree with that. I disagree with that because I watch especially a lot of older content that was shot on real film, and high quality real film is extremely sharp and detailed, and when that gets transferred to a disc, a lot of that information is lost. Even if it's a UHD Blu-ray at 4K and everything, like a older movie that was really shot on a good film, high quality film, and if it ends up getting a bad or poor transfer over to a UHD Blu-ray, it's going to lose a lot of that detail. And even if it is a good transfer, it still loses some. So the Sony, in my opinion, has a way of just trying to recover some of that detail that gets lost along the way. It does not add edge enhancement when the reality creation is used appropriately. So if you either use it on auto or on manual with a moderate setting, I usually use 20 or less, maybe as high as 30, 35 at the most, depending on the content. But typically I just leave it at auto. So if you do that, you shouldn't notice any edge enhancement or artifacts or any negative effects from it. It should just use its contrast algorithm to increase the fine detail that is lost otherwise when it's being transferred. That's my opinion on it. Some people probably disagree, that's fine, but I think the overwhelming majority of people would like the look of it, like what it's doing, and would want to have it. I would also be very, very surprised if in the next few years we don't see Samsung and LG and other companies follow suit and do the same thing with their upcoming processors as well. Alright, so now as far as what we're seeing, again in the comparisons, So on the LGs, you can definitely see, like even right here, the color of that mountain is more saturated, oversaturated. The same thing here. That's the color errors on the LGs. They just come that way. It can be calibrated out. Here, if you look at the rocks on the bottom right, you can see that triangle shape on the Sonys that you cannot see at all on the LG. Here again, the honeycombs are too oversaturated on the LG. There are some areas here and there where I'm seeing the A80J with the new white point because of the increase in brightness, that it seems to be surpassing the capabilities of the camera more so it's looking a little washed out when it's really not. Here you can see where the Sony was kind of adding some orange into the red of that flower, whereas the LG wasn't. This again, the bottom A80J image is looking a little more blown out, washed out, but that's the camera just not picking it up correctly. And if you like that overly red-orange saturation on the LG, then you can replicate that easily on the Sony using live color. It is not accurate. It should not be that way, but if that's what you like and you like that look, you can, like I said, easily just replicate that by using live color on the Sony. So you have options either way there. Here the Sony is really pushing that yellow flower. The camera just can't capture it. If I were to turn the camera settings so that it wouldn't look blown out and washed out like that, it would also make the image look duller, not as bright, and crush more of the shadow detail. So it's a trade-off that kind of has to be made. Again, I'm going to get a camera with more range soon. Anyway, that horse is beaten. As far as before changing the white points, aside from them having different white points out of the box, so different color temperatures, the Sony is more color accurate out of the box. However, the LG is closer and warmer to D65, but there is more shadow detail that is lost with the LG. But it is a bit brighter out of the box on the G1 than the A80J is. And then again, after the change, they're pretty much about the same, other than the differences that the processor makes. Except for in SDR and any situation where dimming can happen, then the LG is brighter. But in general, they're extremely similar. Even right here where the camera is like trying to make the bottom left A80J look brighter, that's the camera, and in person there's not that much of a difference. So yes, the Sony after the change is brighter, but again, it's a small difference. However, like right there, you could see a lot more shadow detail on that antenna on the Sony, which goes into why if you get an LG, calibration really is recommended to fix the shadow detail, because you can try to mitigate it yourself a little bit using certain methods, but the best way is to just get it professionally calibrated. However, on the flip side of that, some people actually like a little bit of that black crush because it does add a higher perceived contrast. So if that's you, then hey, no problem, just don't worry about it. So alright, so I think in the end, I would say the G1 is the better overall TV, especially that it has a 5-year warranty. So either if the money doesn't matter, or if you're interested in a warranty and you're going to game pretty much at all on kind of any device, I would say get the G1. They're similar enough in every other area that the gaming advantage is well worth it. However, if you really don't care about gaming, or you're only going to game a little bit, or you're just a casual gamer, the Sony is perfectly fine and acceptable for gaming. Whether VRR comes or not a big deal for it, because it has other issues that I think matter more. So then that's where the Sony would be my pick, especially for its price. And then the other option is the C1, which again, if you're a gamer and you really don't want to pay all the money for G1, then just get the C1, save the money, and call it a day. But I think overall the A80J is the best value pick for its image quality, and the G1 is just simply the best TV of the year, period. And that's when you take into account everything, even comparing it to the A90J. So I hope you all like this. I hope this helps some of you out, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.